Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's Chief Learning Officer Breakfast Club event, The Changing Face of Executive Education. I'm Ashley St. John, CLO's Editor-in-Chief, and I am so pleased you all can join us for today's discussion with an accomplished and insightful group of learning leaders. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor of today's event, edX for Business. edX for Business is a leading global online learning and skills development platform from 2U. In partnership with the world's top-ranked universities and industry-leading companies, they offer a broad array, of learning and skills development products, from open courses to online certificate programs, virtual boot camps, short courses, and credit-bearing degree programs to help enterprises close skill gaps, improve enterprise agility, and develop the workforce of tomorrow, today. And we're so thankful for your partnership and your support of our Breakfast Club event. We're about to kick off our panel discussion for the day momentarily, where we'll be talking about how executive education is changing, what's shifted since the onset of COVID, and with the other various shifts of the past few years, and what's potentially on the horizon. We have a great panel of speakers today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. At the conclusion of the panel discussion, we'll hear from Steve van der Westhuizen, VP of Product Strategy, Executive Education at 2U, for his fast talk, Executive Education, 4 Lessons We Have Learned from Our Customers. And finally, we will conclude today's event with an interactive discussion where I'll be joined by Steve and Lee Maxey, today's panel moderator, and where all attendees will have the opportunity to share some of your perspectives and reactions in the area of exec ed, and to hear from one another. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Lee Maxey. Lee is CEO of MindMax, a marketing and enrollment management services company that partners with the nation's top universities, including Harvard University, the University of Vermont, UC Berkeley, Syracuse, Boston University, Brown University, and UNC Chapel Hill. Since founding MindMax, Lee has helped dozens of partners reach their enrollment goals while taking pride in building meaningful relationships. As a creative, compassionate, and high-energy coach, Lee has proven his ability to create a vision, articulate it across organizations, and hold that vision through the cultural change process. He's known nationally as a thought leader in the learning tech field, and he is also a longtime member of our CLO advisory board, and we are just so honored to have him join us today. I'd also like to welcome Nancy Coleman, Dean of the Division of Continuing Education and University Extension for Harvard University, Steve Mostin, Associate Fellow with Said Business School, and Jason Weber, Associate Vice Chancellor, Leader in Culture Development at Texas Tech University System. Please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout the discussion. And of course, we encourage you to connect and share your thoughts in the chat as well. So Lee, without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Ashley. Yes, been involved with CLO from the outset, and it's been really great to see what CLO has been able to do in terms of helping learning leaders find good vision and then help them execute successfully in their vision. Having spent a lot of time in the corporate learning world in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and now in the higher ed space, I'm glad that this panel is happening, and I think this is an important conversation about the intersection between higher education and corporate learning and the needs of corporations. I'm really excited to be here with Nancy and Steve and Jason, and I'm going to start with just a quick introductions and have each of you share something about yourself. And we'll start with Nancy, then Steve, and then Jason. So Nancy, if you could share some background, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As Ashley mentioned, I am from Harvard University, and I'm the Dean of Continuing Education and University Extension. My career has really spanned both corporate and higher ed. I've been at a number of higher ed institutions doing online learning, degree programs, executive education. I've been on the corporate side. I've also been a consultant. And I think that gives me a really interesting and unique perspective on what is this marriage of higher ed, of corporations, of executive education. And I'm really happy to be here with you today. What we offer at Harvard is under the onus of continuing education is we have both degree programs, executive education, a center for learning and retirement, and a summer school. So what we do is we frame things in the context of the 60-year curriculum and how we can serve learners over their lifetime. So really nice to be here with you today.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Steve Mostyn, Side Business School, University of Oxford, and I'm here today, and really great to be on this call. My interest is in designing and running exec education programs, which I do many, but in the last 2 or 3 years, I've changed very significantly my views on how we develop leadership capability, and that was really through becoming the head tutor on the Oxford Executive Leadership Program, which is an 8-week online program. We now have 5,000 alumni, which is absolutely remarkable. And I've learned so much about how you engage groups of leaders in a very different way, and really look forward to contributing to this conversation. Prior to that, I ran the corporate business school for Royal Bank of Scotland, and before that, Motorola in Chicago. Thank you, Lee.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Weber. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Leader and Culture Development with the Texas Tech University System. I've been in the learning and development field for the last 12 plus years, working in a number of industries from state government to higher education. Outside of my role, also as an executive coach and advisor, again, spanning a number of industries, and really been focusing on the role of leader development. What does that look like? Full cycle and whole person. Very recently, especially since COVID, our organization has really reevaluated what does it mean to develop providers, medical providers, higher education professionals, and leaders across industry. We have looked at competency-based learning. How do we enhance, again, the outside of an initial offering, how do we support and follow that up? So that's really been the perspective that we've approached, also the role of coaching and all of that. So I'm honored to be here today, and Lee, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thanks everyone. And so we'll keep the same batting order, just starting in different places. So next we'll start with Steve this time, and I'd like to really kick it off with looking at what do you see emerging in terms of how reimagining, redesigning exec ed in your institution, or what do you see some as key themes in the space between exec ed and higher ed? So we'll start with Steve.
Yes, great. Well, thank you for that question. And the biggest change I've seen, and I think it's a developing change, is the real understanding that organizations are trying to build leadership capability, particularly around navigating uncertainty, and it's beyond just a C-suite. So there's a kind of an assumption sometimes in senior executive education that it's for the chosen few. And I'm actually seeing, particularly with the online work, groups of leaders in the kind of mid-talent, mid-levels coming through. And then you add that to the energy and the dynamism of an organization like 2U, who allows the technological reach and the quality of that to have a very different ability to build leadership exec ed. It's also got huge implications to the business model of exec ed, which I think is reverberating around business schools and corporations directly. And I'm interested, we've got a lot of chief learning officers on this call, of course, but I'm finding the location of the budget for development spend moving as well. In addition to chief learning officers, local managers and leaders are being empowered to spend their own budgetary money because it's smaller pots of money. So you've got these strange shifts going on, not only in the actual broader development of leadership capability, but in the business model as well, which I think has huge implications to corporations and to business schools and providers like Center for Creative Leadership, to take one example. Thank you, Lee, and others will obviously develop that theme.
Jason?
Yeah, and I agree with everything that, Steve has mentioned, and that's kind of the beauty of, I think, the perspectives that we have here today as we've been planning this. Right, and a lot of that But I think for us, what we've been seeing is, since COVID and how we want to, and I also phrase it this way, since that experience, that really impacted organizations in a number of different ways. For those that were primarily in person, they went remote and are now back in person. Those that were in person went to a hybrid and remote and in person. I think the reality that we're facing is, as leaders are coming back to the organizations, we can't just pick up where we left off. We really are starting over with our teams. And one of the main focus points for us has been, how do we develop those effective relationships, knowing that we've all been impacted in different ways. And what we are seeking in our leader development, in my experience, the trends have been far more around, again, understanding the impact of change, the emotional intelligence, empathy, even creating and setting expectations. We're also really starting to see training can't just be a one and done. Especially for our leaders, it's hard to be able to pull them away from their daily duties because of the responsibilities and everything that's there. So we've had to get creative and focus more on drip campaigns, meaning we're going to take a theme and each week we're just going to send, whether it's an email, whether it's a short podcast episode, maybe a short video recording, whatever kind of makes the most sense. But we'll do our trainings, but then we have to be able to enhance and continue to support it. So from the training and development in our team, we're having to approach it differently, where it's not a target, it's more of that, all right, we can offer that, but then what's that continuous reminder that we're offering to help our leaders as they're navigating these changes?
Thanks, Jason. And Nancy?
Yeah, so Jason, I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said, because I see a few different trends, and of course, completely in sync with you and Steve on that as well. It's this concept of one and done, right? I think those days are long gone. There's no longer a prescripted pathway for leadership, executive, or professional development. It's very personalized, and it really has a lot of implications to the needs and the interests of the learners. Some of these things in terms of the other trend that we see is format, right? It used to be that executive education was come to a place and spend 3 or 4 days in a topic. And it's not that now. It's more like a lifelong commitment and really a just-in-time approach. So sometimes it's a 2-day course, sometimes it might be a 2-hour webinar. It depends on the format and it depends on the need. And there's just this constant need to follow up and to follow a learning with something that builds on it that might get to the next level. The other trend I see, particularly among our participants, is there's this real hunger and this real need to develop global business competencies. And what I mean by that is the opportunity to, and this has always been there, but I think it's just heightened because our world is getting so much smaller. The ability to understand people from different cultures, to be able to work with different groups, whether it be differences in time zones or personality or job roles, just the ability to be able to bridge that gap and make those connections and figure out how to work together for a common good.
I appreciate that, Nancy. I know Harvard's attempt at the 60-year curriculum. Many on-ramps and off-ramps as people are going through life, I think is a really important concept. And MyMax works with mostly non-credit certificates. And one of the things that we work with schools on and struggle with is that businesses, smaller businesses, as you were referring to, Steve, don't have the budget to bring in a giant training firm. And so, how do I provide resource to an employee or 3 employees? And I do think that's where higher ed, exec ed can really provide that dip in, dip out. But as we've been talking about is, we're not going back to pre-pandemic. And one of my takeaways from the pandemic is maybe for one of the first times in a long time, the whole world experienced something similar. And the compassion or the awareness that we have a lot more alike than we are different opportunity to really connect. So go on to a next question, and just, the idea to follow on where Nancy left off, this concept of coaching and following on with exec ed to reinforce skills learned. We all know the car wash analogy, the car gets dirty again. So it's not just a series of car washes. What is it that happens to help someone really change or reinforce those skills to drive them back in the organization? And we'll start with you, Jason.
The idea of bringing coaching into an organization for us at Texas Tech is still relatively new. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, and I think like a lot of industries, coaching was viewed as first or second step of disciplinary process. However, when we look at, executive and professional coaching and really what the, kind of what the essence of that is, we have to be able to create a separation and truly understand. I think for our leaders, one of the things that we have been really focusing on, or at least where I've been spending time, is, do our executive leaders understand how to identify development goals when they're working with their coaches? A challenge that I've seen just in my own experiences has been executive leaders at times will say, I've already gotten to this position, so I'm good. Right. And, we joke and say, well, if you're telling me you don't need training, you need training. Right. So we joke about that. But at the same time, I think there's something we can pull from that. When we think about how do we bring, development goals into, again, coaching, whether it's whatever that may look like, mentoring relationships and all of that, I would offer, to kind of start this conversation, do our leaders understand, and do they have an awareness that, leader development is a journey? And I think we would all agree with that. You don't get there. We're constantly learning, we're constantly developing. So do our leaders have a clear understanding of how to create effective development goals? And I think at times that's where we see a lot of the disconnect, is we haven't prepared kind of before sending them in and implementing a coaching program.
Great.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that, Jason, because I think in a lot of cases, what we're seeing is sometimes training, whether we call it leader development or skills training or some sort of developmental training, is seen as, oh, this person is a little weak on this particular area, let's send them to training. And what we see is oftentimes the managers of these people who are going to training or to professional development don't really understand what's in the curriculum and what is this person going to learn. They might look at a course description and say, oh, that sounds great, my person needs that. But in order to really be successful, learning is a journey, but it's also partnership. The manager of the employees, of the folks who are going to professional development, really need to understand what's part of that. And then there needs to be pull through when the individuals come back from their executive education experience to say, what did you learn? What are the takeaways? How do we start implementing that with regular follow-ups? And that can be done via coaching. That could be done via outsourced coaching. I know we have a really interesting, innovative program that we love, which is a women's leadership program, when we bring both the women leaders and their bosses in. The bosses are there for a smaller part of the program, and they experience the program together. And what that does holistically is it just really knits together the content and creates this partnership of learning that both parties are moving forward and getting something from the experience and going back to their jobs and being a lot more effective.
Yeah. Great. And I want to add to that in a different way. What we've learned in the last 2 years is really interesting around how employees engage with organizations. And so Gallup and others are saying that trust is much higher around the immediate work team than it is to the corporational firm. So let's hold that idea for a moment. The other thing I hear all the time in the classroom, it's all about context. It's all about context of your organization. So what we try to do at Oxford, and I encourage at every moment, is leaders as teachers. And I found this to be the most sticky way to make learning stick, because it's all about context. So we often bring in a kind of senior director or MD or vice president with the faculty to then co-teach. But more importantly, and to your point earlier about small organizations, you could do some online input, and then you could do some sense making with the leader of that small organization saying, how does this performance management model fit our context? Leaders as teachers opens them up as vulnerable because they're not professional teachers, but the engagement is higher. So I want to build on this coaching thing of anyone on this call who wants to get huge benefit from their investment, engage your leaders as teachers as well. It also goes straight to Nancy's great point around the manager's manager sometimes doesn't know what's in the curriculum. The minute you ask someone to teach, guess what? They get nervous and say, tell me again about how that works. And they become learners as well. You know, people are engaged with learner curiosity. And if they're modeling it as teachers, you're then inching towards the culture change you're trying to do in your context. So leaders as teachers is my addition to this conversation about coaching.
I heard early on as a young parent that all parents are great teachers. The question is, what are they teaching? And I think the same thing is very true with leaders. Everyone's always watching, and they're always watching, and they're always learning. And the modeling, I can't emphasize that enough, is of importance. We're going to switch up our order a little bit to just whoever would like to answer. I'm going to try and tee up some of the questions that we got in the Q&A. So to remind people who are attending, if you'd like to add a question in the Q&A, please do. And we will not be able to get to all of them, but we will try and answer as many as we can. So I'm going to combine a couple. One is related to related to cost, on exec ed costs. And I know, the bushel of wheat at Harvard Extension, it surprises people how low the cost is to take some of the programs there. But one is related to, is this cost effective for a small business? And the other is around, I'm going to combine that with talking about the importance of exec ed for smaller companies, less than 100 people. So whoever would like to start and whoever would like to respond, go ahead.
Lee, I'm happy to jump in just because you kind of called on me a little bit unofficially there. And I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say as well. I think it becomes cost effective because you can't afford not to do it, especially right now. I've got a couple of comments on that. Especially right now when the talent market, I mean, we all know you're all in this industry. The talent market is so hot right now. We're losing people left and right to employers down the street who are offering more money, better professional development, better remote work, you name it, right? We're all in that same boat. So from a cost of doing business, absolutely. I would also say that there are programs out there for different price levels. For example, we have both open enrollment courses that if you've got 2 people, you could send them. We've got, and I'm sure everyone does as well. We've got customized programs that you could bring a program in for 20 or 30 people for a fraction of the cost. That's a little bit more customized. So my advice to you is do your homework and find something at a price and quality point that makes sense for your organization.
Right.
Building on what Nancy was saying there, it's kind of one of those things when we look at developing our leaders and we think about some of these topics around, accountability, strategic planning, building effective communication within our teams. Generally, I like to ask that question, do we want to spend a few minutes up front learning how and kind of working through that, or spend a few hours on the back end trying to fix? And I think that fits really well kind of with what Nancy was saying, and that we can't afford not to. At what point do we say that we need to make that investment? And again, with full respect and understanding, especially with smaller companies, of we don't have the budget, we don't have that. In my experience, I found a lot of success working with the local community colleges, technical colleges, or even higher education institutions. Having worked in a technical college setting and then moving up to more of a university setting, there are a significant amount of opportunities there to partner. A lot of programs that are available that many of our schools, they have the knowledge and resources, and we've just seen a lot of success with that community education side, even if we don't have, the luxury of bringing in a full company to do that. But I think also with our virtual learning options, there's a number of different resources that are out there that can be leveraged. And I think ultimately find what works, right? Having that understanding of your team, of your leaders, to say, how do they prefer to learn? I've been faced with teams who have said, we want development, we need it, but you got 5 minutes, so figure it out, right? Well, of course, we as learning and development leaders, we want to be able to say, well, the more time you give us, the better. But how do we adapt in those settings? I personally have found a lot of success with podcasts, that micro learning. I've seen that coming up in the content. What makes sense? How can we be those supporters? Maybe it's a question sheet that we provide around a certain topic. Hey, leaders, in a team meeting, just ask one of these, right? We can get those conversations going. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can really be creative that doesn't have a significant impact on our budgets.
I want to build on all those points around what does the research tell us about development and actually what works. And we know quite a lot about that. I think McKinsey did a great job years ago with that great article, How Do Execs Grow? And at Motorola, we use this as our sort of talent guiding principle. And number one was highly individualized development plans. People like it when it's highly individualized, and you just, in a small business, put one of your execs as that's a responsibility. But highly individualized could mean that this person gets a position on a local charity board because that's hugely developmental. So it's not all about developmental solutions. I also think if I look at the business model of 2U and their partners, they're clever and they've managed the economies of scale by getting the brands to do the heavy lifting. So 2U use, of course, Oxford, Harvard, many other business schools, MIT, and that allows access at a very, very different price point for 4 of your execs in a small company to pay $2,000 for an 8-week course. It's a very, very different price point than a full exec ed program at Harvard, for example. So think about how execs grow. Understand that list. There's about 20 activities. You can even do things like reverse mentoring, which is partner with your local technical college, school, university, and get the students to reverse mentor your execs. It's not all about development programs. You can have a lot of fun designing your talent program as a developmental activity as well. Give the work back to the people who need it and have some fun with it. It's engaging. And that, of course, drives the whole retention debate of we want to hang out here. We have fun development plans which are highly individualized. You know what? You could do it for $10,000 for a small 50-person company.
Steve, if I can add to that point, I would say I'm going to go back to the COVID days, right? Smack dab in the middle of 2020. There's 300 people in my division, and I was completely amazed at the creativity of some of my managers that said, you know what, I want to do some team development work. So they went out and they found a piece of content, whether it be a MOOC, an article, whatever it was, and they built a program around that, and they facilitated it for their teams. So I would say that, and that's close to free, right? So depending on your budget, I would say that facilitation skill and the ability to take content, adjust the content and figure out how is it relevant for your team and how do I get my team to understand this?
Yes.
A really critical skill to help your managers develop, because that can take you a long way.
Well, let's think about our role, Nancy, and everyone on this call. Actually, the real value we add is we are curators now. Content is everywhere, but there's so much content, but the ability to curate, as that little exercise showed in your team, is exactly what it's about. But without our expertise, we could create an exec ed program with whatever exists on YouTube right now in this moment, and we'd have a pretty good program, I think. but it's about the skill of curation. That's why the people on this call are so important. In they're curators, not teachers or even educators anymore. That's the key skill we need.
100%.
And I would love to see us change our view of education from a hub and spoke model to, you know, what you're talking about, a more matrix.
Yep.
Like we can learn from everybody. I used to do 360s with the Center for Creative Leadership, and I would deliver those. And the developmental activities, as you're talking about, Steve, were the most fun part. Like, how creative could you be? And it doesn't have to be high cost. It could be low cost, but it's really more what's relevant to that person, and connecting what they're passionate about with what the entity needs. Like finding that Venn diagram connection between their passion and what the organization needs. And then the developmental activities sort of just jump out from there pretty easily. And it doesn't have to cost a whole lot. It's about creativity.
That's right.
We have a couple questions, and I'm going to try and combine them around measurement. And so, how are you measuring? And we'll go back to a batting order here. So we'll start again with you, Nancy. And how are you measuring executive education and the impact that it's having, and what kinds of things have changed in how you measure and what you measure?
Yeah, well, Lee, that's interesting because my perspective is really one more of a provider, right? So I'm going to have a different answer to that question than some of my colleagues. But I think it really goes back to it has to map to the goals. What are you trying to achieve with your executive education, and how do we map that to objectives and specific activities within the company or the department or the goal? We're always following up with our participants to see what they're doing. One of the really interesting things for us is this, because we have different levels of education from executive ed to degree programs, is curiosity and continuation is certainly a measurement variable for us. Someone might go to a 2-day program on artificial intelligence and then get really curious, and whether they continue with us or somewhere else, but then it leads to a new skill, that's for a win for us. And we would definitely consider that on the success scale. So that's a little bit on how we think about it, but I'm also very interested to hear what my colleagues have to say about this one.
Yeah, let me build on that, because it's one of these almost circular questions I've heard so many times, and we've got to get away from the traditional dialogue around ROI, because I think the people on this call are having that question asked of them by their CEOs all the time. And the way we've now starting to answer that in Oxford is really inspired by Robert Brinkenoff's The Success Case Method. I just think it's the best and the most elegant way to answer that question. And for me, it's the narrative stories of change that happen as a result of an intervention. Even more powerful if you get the participants who've been through that process to document the changes. For example, in the UK, we're working with the further education sector. We've got 370 CEOs in further education colleges we've worked with, and the measure there has been, what are the stories of change, share them, and then our role at the center is to then connect to these stories, so you're actually creating a kind of a positive cycle of improved and best practice. So success case method, we're really rediscovering and implementing, and also in a university setting, and it'd be interesting to see if that's applicable to Jason's environment as well. There's so many PhDs and master's students looking for a fantastic project. Just put them on the back end of an exec education project and say, please write this up over a long period. They'll be delighted, because very few of them have fantastic client opportunities to write it up. So you've got almost not free resource, but willing, engaged resource to write it up in a very academic way if you want it. So use the leverage of your institution if you're in a university to further establish success case method. That's the way I've found is the most. It also allows you to answer the question, what about the 5% who get nothing from the program? Yeah, because the outweighing value of the majority who do far exceeds the investment cost by multiples of 100 in some cases. Great question, whoever asked it.
You know, this has been a top of mind topic for us, in the sense that when the pandemic started as a university, at that time I was working with one of our health sciences center. That's an in-person learning environment. The pandemic overnight forced us into a remote environment. So we had to very quickly adapt. So our people and values team, we did, and we transitioned all of our training from in-person to virtual, and we just went with it. Measuring that was not part of our top 3 in there. We just needed to meet the needs. We saw an increase of maybe 40 to 50 learners every month to over 1,400 learners every month in a matter of 3 weeks. So we had to be very responsive. However, that doesn't necessarily fly anymore, right? Now we're getting those questions of what is the effectiveness that we are seeing? And so, you know, it's caused us to really slow down and say, any programs moving forward, we start with, what is it that we want to measure? What is it that we want to find? We've been able to go back and identify, as we function at each of our universities through a values-based culture, we're able to connect those learnings and those experience to hiring, retention, you know, any lawsuit potentials. We're able to start seeing the benefits of that. But again, from a learning and development, we need to be very intentional with that. And to build off of what Steve had just said, one of the partnerships that we've recently created is with one of our schools of education. And it was just to that point. They have grad students that love measuring. And yet, as much as I can get behind it, we have all these other things that we have to do. And I'm like, where do we begin? And so what we're actually going to be doing is bringing grad students into our programs to, one, experience the program. So we're giving them additional professional development, but 2, we're allowing them to create the evaluation tools, administer the tools, analyze the data, and report out. So we're creating a fully comprehensive and embedded program that's going to benefit us in multiple ways, that we can learn from each other, create those models so they're naturally a fit. But it's definitely an area of growth. So I don't know that anybody has it perfectly figured out. If you do, let me know. I'd love to jump in there with you. But you know, this is such an important topic, because as we work through these changes and we talk about budget allocation and we talk about hiring and staffing with finding talent, we have to be able to show those metrics that, listen, this is working and here's what it's doing for the organization. Now, again, depending on your industry, depending on what's important to you, that's where you're going to differentiate what you're measuring. But overall, this is absolutely a key topic that we really need to be, you know, continuing to discuss and learning. I'm going to go back to what we said earlier, learning from each other. I think that's where we have the most opportunity.
I'm going to respond to some of the chat as well around curiosity, which you brought up, Steve. MindMax is a value-driven company. We have 5 core values. One of our values is to provide actionable insights. And the way we measure that is culturally, and it's with language. Are you asking good questions? Are you listening? And so we have a responsibility to each other, an accountability, that if we hear closed-ended questions, you know, being used often by someone, that's a coaching opportunity. That it doesn't matter where you are in the organization. You can say, hey, you know, let's try an open-ended question next time instead of, you know, closed-ended questions, because we're not going to find anything out with closed-ended questions. And then additionally, the idea of, you know, culture, we also do all of our quarterly reviews. The first thing we do is we go through, how are you doing on each of the 5 values? Are you doing it all of the time? Is it occasional? And quite frankly, if someone's not living according to values in our organization, you know, they're not long for the organization. It just doesn't fit. And so there are qualitative things that can also be measured in a cultural way as well. And I've seen that done really poorly, and very like rigidly. I'm a trained soccer ref. And you can see people who have never played soccer as soccer refs basically letter of the law, not the spirit of the game. And I think, business and life, quite frankly, is officiating to the spirit of life, not, oh, well, I mean, data can be brutal if it's not done with thoughtfulness and curiosity. So would like to open it up for, I know we're getting close to some time here, but would like to open up to some more questions that we have from people that are participants here. So one of the questions is really around, post-pandemic and what modalities and the shift in modalities. And then also someone is asking for economists. They're anticipating a recession. So doom and gloom. No, I'm kidding. I'm being silly. But if and are we, and as we move towards a recession, depending on where you are in that continuum, how is that going to impact some of the things that we're talking about now, or impact post-pandemic recovery or changes? So, and we'll start, I think, with you, Steve, and go around. You're muted, Steve.
Economic one's interesting in that there's a kind of contradiction about this economic downturn, if that's in fact happening, and that's this huge, and Nancy mentioned it earlier, skill shortage. So actually, just from my knowledge of what's happening in our business school and others, there's actually a record high of inquiries and interest, and I think a lot of it's linked to talent retention. But I think that's that would be my starting point on this. But I'll hand to someone else to take this further. So I actually see an uptick at the moment. That could change, mainly because of the talent shortage, and this is linked to engagement and retention is exec ed now, which it always has been, but it's more skewed now, I think.
Just jump in. Go ahead, Nancy.
I wanted to actually address the modality question, but I don't know, Jason, do you have a follow-up comment to Steve that might make sense to go to first?
Well, and I guess what I would say to kind of build off of Steve is we think about, whatever the future may hold for us, right? As we talk about, impacts to budgets, impacts to our society and how things are, could potentially end up being. I think the most important thing for us is alignment with our executives. What is your conversation? What is your relationship like in the learning and development side with your president, your CEO, and that executive team? Do we have clarity and alignment around the strategic plan? Are we helping inform the development of strategic planning? I think that's where we have to be able to jump in and say, listen, regardless of the challenges, here's how learning and development can help with that, right? What is it that we can do to partner and start making these recommendations? Even if we've had that, approach of, oh, you're just, and I've heard this one before, you're just training, right? Well, let me state it in another way. As we are working with the ebbs and flows of the business, I may not have a full comprehensive understanding of your role, but what we can do is we can help support your leadership team better develop effective relationships, which we know is going to help us through times of change, better understand processes for change, right? And so what role are we playing to help the organization get ahead of what potentially could be? That's what I would add to what Steve was saying. But Nancy, if we want to talk modalities, I'd say let's go there.
Well, so I'm going to jump in and answer the question with the modality question. So full disclosure, I've been an online learning, Lee knows this, we have a big history. I've been an online learning evangelist since 2004, and I've seen the incredible things that it can do. And here at Harvard, when the pandemic hit, we had professional development programs that were 100% face-to-face. Come to Cambridge, you spend a few days with us, or we come to you. And then, like many others, we were forced to shift overnight. And what we've learned through that exercise is, and we all know the power of executive education is also bringing people together and networking, and what you learn from your peers is that online delivery of executive professional development leadership programs can be extremely effective if it's done right and it's done intentionally. And so now we are making some strategic investments. So we have kept the online delivery of our courses. They're getting huge reviews from people who just can't come to Cambridge. They might want to, but they can't. And now we're really investing in the intentional development of not just, hey, let's set up a Zoom and talk for 8 hours. How do we deliver these in ways that are optimized for our participants, that meet students where they are, and that are highly effective learning? So I think that online executive education is here to stay, but I think there's really critical questions to ask. Is this just a Zoom room, or is this really intentionally designed to be effective for the participants? I also think that online executive education is a good answer to the recession and cost problem because it's less expensive. It's not always less expensive to deliver, especially in the beginning, but it is definitely less expensive from a price point. So as we think about modalities versus, online versus on campus, and also breaking things up into bite-sized chunks, naturally you develop things as an offshoot of that are at different price points that I think will help to recession-proof our business. I don't know if it's the full answer, but I think it's going to be a lot more palatable and offer more options than we've ever seen before when, if we do go into recessionary times.
I want to just kind of jump on that because I love what you were saying there, Nancy. And one of the areas that we spend a lot of time talking about are the viewpoints that we all bring, every one of our employees, right? We all have different life experiences. And as we think about what is the role of training, what is the role of learning in our organizations, pairing it with, this matrix form where we have that opportunity to learn, what are we doing in our organizations to foster that? When we say, hey, one of our team members comes in, they've got an expertise in this, or they've had life experience in that, how could we leverage that? So it's just, as you were talking and thinking about, in a downturn, or when it's, why aren't we looking inside as well to be able to learn from each other? What type of culture are we fostering and creating so that we can keep learning going? Because we have so many experiences and so many different viewpoints within our own teams and within our own organizations.
One of the things I'm grateful for our sponsor here, 2U edX, back to the measurement and modality. 2U and edX, one of the things that edX started with was this idea of collecting a tremendous amount of data from an instructional design standpoint, that the measurement about how learners were interacting with content, and so much information has been collected over the last, I don't know how many years, 8-10 years, and improving instructional design, or I'll just say user experience, and really, I know, Nancy, you are huge into human-centered kinds of things. So like to hear some of your thoughts about how leveraging edX, leveraging 2U has been helpful to you guys.
One of the key things that I've had the really focus on and the opportunity just to learn through experiences, how do we create that, again, continuous learning loop or cycle, or however we want to define it? If we're able to offer, training, that's great in the moment, right? We can give resources and we can encourage, but it's partners like this where we can say, all right, if you want to learn more, and going back to what Nancy was saying earlier about that curiosity, right? And we're building that curiosity. Well, you also have this path of learning and this path of learning and this path, right? So by being able to partner with that, offering, whether it be TED Talks, video learning, MOOCs, it all depends on what you have. But I think the key thing is we can really leverage those to say, let's keep that learning going, right? And you can learn in multiple ways. You can learn in multiple, approaches, and how do we apply that? And so creating those opportunities to meet the learners where they are, I think, is really the most important.
I would concur, Lee, with that observation of 2U edX. I've worked with them on 2 or 3 projects, 2 of them designing, 8-week programs from scratch, one a strategy program, and their competence is an absolute obsession on design. And they slow everything down. They work with faculty who know their material well and painstakingly then translate it into obsessive detail, and it could even be down to graphic design of layout of the model or whatever it is. And actually, it in reverse educates and trains us as educators in Oxford into that methodology, and I think helps us be more succinct and much clearer, not so much about the model we're so obsessed with, but with how it's received and perceived in a learning environment. That is probably one of their primary market defining competencies, as well as the other one, which we won't go into in this, but their obsession with detailed marketing through Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, really minutiae marketing, which they've got tons of evidence on of how buyers at the individual level, again, make decisions about their own development.
I'm going to go in a little different direction with one of our questions, talking about, and partly because I'm at a conference right now. We just had a Center for Autism present about how to basically push in people who are on the autistic spectrum into the work world and into education, higher ed specifically, and it was not just about autism, but it was about the intersectionality of autism, LGBTQ, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we create spaces. And I'm gonna just put it out there that I didn't prep you guys for this at all, but what role and how can that connect? Higher ed is a very special thing in the sense that it does create special spaces, or can create special spaces. What are your thoughts about how exec ed can play a role in that intersectionality between diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access, to help companies make that shift that may be having a hard time doing that themselves, or that exec ed may be having a hard time doing itself too. But I'm just going to throw that out there, and whoever would like to take that.
I'll start with just some general observations. I think we're working through it right now, and neurodiversity is a huge part of this as well. And I would even say we have to examine the language of how we even define this. So even your own phrase of how do we push those people into the work world, how do we create the spaces? I think the first starting point we've tried to start to think about is let's co-create those spaces, because I don't understand enough around it, and so I have to involve, a different group of people in the design process. So involve in the design, co-create is the answer, but we're on the journey. We're starting this out, and I'd love to hear more about this, but we've got to challenge our own assumptions of where we even start on this debate.
Yeah, I'll step in, Steve, and echo your point. I think we are still learning, but executive ed, like any other space or any other department or organization, we have got to continue to train the trainers, our leaders, how to create inclusive spaces and how to do that even more mindfully and intentionally than before. And that is very much a work in progress and very much something at the top of all of our minds, I'm sure.
I think being able to foster an awareness around openness and willingness, I think many times we see those roadblocks where we learn something that is outside of maybe an experience that we've had or a viewpoint that we've had. How can we foster that space where individuals can, that safe space in the context of that I can share kind of my viewpoint, where I'm coming from, And then you can share yours and we can engage and we can dialogue, even if we disagree, to be able to ask those questions. You know, maybe I've disagreed with this in the past, but I'd love to learn more about where you're coming from. What opportunities are we creating? I mean, that kind of brings in all that we've been talking about today, the coaching, asking the open-ended questions like Lee had mentioned, right? The different modalities. I think we have a prime opportunity, virtual spaces, virtual learning, meeting our learners where they're at. But I think ultimately for our overall culture, when we're dealing with DEIB and other, you know, areas in that, I tend, and this is again just me personally, is I tend to really focus on how can we create that space of openness and willingness to listen and to hear each other.
I'm on a community fund board in the small community I'm at. And we were talking about how to budget for heating oil challenges that people are going to have this winter. And the challenge that we were trying to address is how do we know who needs help? Because they're unlikely to raise their hand and say, I need help. And someone said, well, it's because of pride. I'm like, time out. And related to this is it's not about pride, it's about how do we maintain people's dignity. And if we're and this is a post-COVID learning for me as well, is focusing on people's dignity and maintaining that. And that we, back to that curious comment that you made, Steve, that with dignity, we can be curious about how we all can improve and how we can and help each other in that. And that, again, a pandemic reflection is we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. We can all infect each other positively or negatively. So it's been really great to talk with all of you. And I'm going to shift to a closing comments from each of you. And we'll start with Jason, then Nancy, then Steve. But I just want to say that, you know, this has been a great conversation. I've appreciated people willingness to, you know, ad hoc answer things and explore ideas. So Jason, just some closing comments on wherever you'd like to take things, and then we'll go Nancy and Steve.
Sounds great. Thanks, Lee. You know, I think from my viewpoint, what I would encourage is how do we create a space that's continuous? You know, when we are looking at the amount of change that we're experiencing in a number of different elements, our business, our operations, just all of that in learning and development, how do we create it so that it's continuous? I had mentioned earlier a drip campaign. A drip campaign is, again, just simply little reminders. How we do that in our organization is every Monday I send one email around a topic that we are actually collectively working through. Short and sweet, one-page flyer. I've also added in like a 5-minute little podcast episode to go with it, because our learners, again, they take in information differently, and that's okay, meeting them where they are. But little things, how can we, if we are going to emphasize certain development, especially with our educators, I'll close my comments with this. I offer this as a reminder, and I think we all see this, is that when we are talking about creating change and creating a space of learning, that dynamic and relationship between executives, senior managers, middle managers, all the way down to staff is very fragile. You know, when we talk about creating trust and creating these spaces, if we are encouraging and we are enabling our executive leaders to work through these trainings, then we have to be able to foster that so that they can demonstrate that. Because the moment we say this is important, this is what we're doing, and then a team member or a manager gets excited and they go, and an executive or senior leader says, no, not really, we've done damage, right? And so how can we create that space of continuous learning, continuous question asking? And I'll stop there because I could go on and on.
Yeah, Jason, thank you. Thank you for that. We cannot take our foot off the gas here. I think we are at such an interesting inflection point in education, if you will, is that, you know, we talked earlier about content is freely available. It doesn't mean it's the right content. It doesn't even mean it's good or accurate content, right? But it's available. And the thing that I think we need to keep in mind is there's no one size fits all approach. There's no one best way to do this. the answer that I like to use a lot and people roll their eyes at me is it depends. It just depends, right? So think about, how do we continue to curate that content using a blend of different modalities, of programs, of services, of small pockets of information that work for our unique audiences, our unique budgets to meet the learners where they are? Because I think that's also a really key thing about the space that we're in today, is we need to meet the learners where they are, get their interests, and engage them in the content.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I just want to reiterate, we should all on this call become curators, get your leaders teaching. And Lee, I really like your thing about questions. If you can impact your leaders asking better quality questions, you're unlocking huge value. And there's a whole seminar discussion to be on the power of questions, which has appeared in the chat. So curate, get leaders teaching, ask better questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I used to say, I don't know, once in a while before COVID. And I'll end with one of my greatest takeaways from COVID is, I say, I don't know a lot now. And what's neat about it is people are kind of okay with it, because we just don't know. And I think that's a great spirit to approach the world with, is not necessarily knowing, but being open and curious. So appreciate all the great insights from everyone, appreciate everyone's attendance and your thoughtfulness, and please stay on if you'd like for the fast talk, which is coming up with Steve. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much, Lee, Nancy, Steve, and Jason. It's been so fun seeing the comments come in the chat and in the Q&A. There's been so much great dialogue and just really nice feedback from people attending. So thank you so much. It was a great discussion today, and we appreciate you all being here. It so often happens that the insights, like the knowledge and the ideas shared in the chat, add a whole extra level of value to these conversations, which is always so great to see. So I did want to note that once this session concludes, within the next day or so, we'll be following up with all registered attendees with a link to the full recording of this session, as well as a transcript of the chat for your reference. So again, just thank you to each of you for being here with us today. At this time, I'm pleased to pass things over to Steve van der Westhuizen, VP of Product Strategy, Executive Education at 2U, for his fast talk, Executive Education, 4 Lessons We Have Learned from Our Customers.
Thanks, Ashley. Could I just confirm, Ashley, that you can see the slides?
Yep, I can see him.
Awesome. What a fantastic panel, an incredibly insightful conversation, and hopefully I'll be able to build on some of those themes that have been uncovered today. And I think it was Steve who alluded to it already. I think we're in the privileged position at edX2U in that we have this real richness and depth of data that we're actually able to build on and kind of learn and grow in our journey from there. And we're still learning. It's still a journey for us. And in the edX platform itself, in the open courses kind of portfolio, we have over 41 million learners. But in executive education specifically, which we're focused on today, we've already had over 254,000 learners from more than 180 countries across 250 courses, and courses across a number of subject verticals, across a number of capabilities and topics. And we'll touch on that a bit later. But I think needless to say, what we've learned here is a heck of a lot. And the important thing for us is that while we've entered the enterprise space in the last couple of years, and it's kind of the fastest growing part of our business, and we're really excited. I think for us, a lot of these 254,000 learners are actually individual learners who went and paid for the program itself. And I think it was alluded to earlier already, you're looking at around a $2,000 plus price point. And so for us, it's really interesting, and some of the insights that I'll share today is that you're getting it directly from working professionals interested in their development, who are so driven and so motivated from a career perspective, from a capabilities perspective, they're going out and investing in themselves at this particular level. So I think I've got 4 insights or 4 lessons we've learned. I've got just under 15 minutes, and let's get going. So the first lesson we kind of want to talk around is high quality is human. And that's often the thing associated with executive education is this element of quality and being a quality experience. And so what we did is at the end of last year, we did some external research and we started to tap into what are the variables or what is the thinking pattern around someone considering an online learning program. And we kind of looked at those decision-making kind of variables, but then we flipped it and also said, what are the things that would stop you considering online learning? And what are the challenges that you would see with the modality itself? And I think we had a bit of that conversation in the panel. And the interesting thing here is that it comes kind of in three major themes, but they're all kind of lumped under this one element of human, right? And so you can see some of the quotes we've taken there in not being able to ask the lecturer questions compared to the opportunity to do that face to face. The ability or the frustration about very much being on my own and totally kind of going through that learning journey without any assistance, or not having the same help and guidance that you would have on campus, or not easy to mix with classmates. And so the ability to network. And so you can see there's this desire for human connection, but also importantly, this association with kind of quality or high quality is actually associated to a human experience, to human connection. And so we kind of summarized it in kind of these three aspects. In one, if you're thinking about executive education and online specifically where we're coming from, that element of human connection we feel is access to experts. That's what your learners are looking for. Access to support, so the opportunity to ask someone for help. And also the element of experts is actually getting feedback, right? And so the modality we follow and the pedagogical approach, we follow quite a rigorous assessment exercise included in that quite often. But the ability and the opportunity to receive individualized, personalized feedback from a subject matter expert or from a tutor who's then also going to facilitate a conversation with you and the rest of the cohort, or the third kind of pillar there of community, is absolutely critical. And having this global cohort of learners whom you can learn alongside, and then the subject matter experts who you can learn from, we kind of feel that comes out really deeply in the research. And then in our own data as well, when we're asking our students in terms of the actual learning experience, what are the most valuable aspects, that human connection comes out loud and clear. I think one of the byproducts or useful things that comes out of this human touch or human connection actually is a level of accountability. And the panel discussed earlier that age-old complexity around how do you measure ROI. And I think I entered the EdTech world in 2009, so it's been a while. And I think we were kind of struggling with that conversation back then still. But I think one of the more hygiene measurements of impact, at least when you're starting, is to have some level of completion rate, right? And if you're going to be making that investment into executive education, what we have found is that this human aspect of being able to learn alongside others and learn from real humans who are engaging with you throughout the program actually drives these completion rates to 90% plus, as you can see there. Then I think the second lesson for us, and importantly, as I said, primarily those 254,000 learners, a large percentage have come as individual consumers. We've had to be really, really sure, or done a lot of kind of research into what are the most important skills and capabilities that working professionals and the organizations they're working for, what are they in demand for? What are they looking for? What are they looking to develop? And we tried to build some kind of, or we needed some kind of framework in order to kind of structure and organize our thinking as we build out a portfolio with all our partners. And what we did is we consolidated a whole bunch of skills frameworks out there into kind of this pyramid where digital capability forms the foundation. And then you have functional expertise, right? So functional expertise being the very specific set of skills required for your technical role. So if you're a marketing manager, the SEO skills, the marketing analytical skills, whatever it may be, those technical skills unique to your particular business area or role. But there's three levels on those. There's the necessary skills, which are kind of your baseline entry point into that, the defining skills, but then the distinguishing skills, which are more likely to be held by the leaders of that particular technical business area. So if you are a marketing manager, what are those emerging, distinguishing skills, quite often new technology that would set you apart, that would help you and enable you as that leader to lead your marketing division? And so we see that as functional expertise. The next level up the pyramid is analytical and critical thinking. And I think there's two elements to this. The analytical thinking around actually being able to work with data and analyze data. And what we're seeing is in our research, or should I say in our data of our courses that fall under this particular vertical, is that your representation of who that student is so broad. It doesn't kind of say, particularly from finance, there's no representation, or from supply chain or something like that. There really is a broad spectrum. And what it kind of tells you also, and I think everyone on the call would kind of acknowledge, that data is very much a part of almost everyone's role. And on the flip side of that, this element of critical thinking. So it's one thing to be able to analyze the data, but it's another then to be able to connect the dots and to think critically around what insights need to be derived from that. And then what are the actionable strategies or tactics or plans that need to go back into the business in order to react to that particular data. And again, we think critical for all of those in a leadership and a management position is that particular element of analytical and critical thinking. The top two, interpersonal skills or power skills, soft skills, I think there's kind of various terms for it today. Unsurprisingly, the top there, and then leadership as well. But what I wanted to draw back to the panel discussion is that those are almost, there's not really a level of mastery of those. I don't think you're actually able to master leadership from that perspective. And so it's a continuous lifelong journey in terms of leadership, in terms of becoming a better leader. And think about what was required of a leader maybe 2.5 years ago. What are the capabilities, or what did you need to equip your leaders with to be able to deal effectively in leading their teams? I think that's changed dramatically in the last 2.5 years. And maybe this kind of gives a snapshot of just some of those topics or some of those areas that now management and leadership professionals are having to consider. So one, the changing nature of leadership itself, but elements of D&I, which we know is absolutely critical to building a more inclusive workforce. Elements around sustainability, right? So what is the organization's position on sustainability? What is our strategy? AI and machine learning tied actually directly to digital transformation. And so we launched an AI course a few years ago, and your audience on that was actually initially early adopters. So your CTOs, that top of that kind of distinguishing skill, you saw that audience come in. But the subject matter of AI has actually transformed into digital transformation so much that now the most critical element in leadership development around digital transformation is actually the human element. It's actually that managing change and the adoption and the acceptance of that. And then obviously we have the interpersonal and soft skills, how those have developed over the last 2.5 years, especially coming out of a post-COVID world, and now in a world where this war for talent is accentuated and retention is absolutely critical. But as mentioned in the panel, you have this juxtaposition of being in a flattened economy with kind of a low unemployment rate, specifically in the US. And so there's all these complexities, macroeconomic factors that leaders today need to be equipped with. And so you can see these things are ongoing, should I say, continuously changing. And so to be a leader in kind of today's business environment is incredibly challenging. And so for us, it's trying to be at the forefront of what's coming next. And I think that's key to executive education. We're almost at time, and so I'll kind of breeze through this, but where is the executive specific role in the L&D strategy? And I think it was touched on really well in the panel itself, is that it's broadened out where historically exec ed was maybe just associated with the C-suite. You're now having, because of scalability of online, you're now able to involve middle management, early management, and as well as a global workforce, actually being able to access high quality executive education, all part of one global cohort. And you can see folks right from the kind of mid-career all the way to the executives. Those are now your audience, whereas I would say historically was really just the executives who were part of that. The way we think about it as well is that from a learning strategy perspective, you'll always have those important and critical micro learning libraries. You'll have the open course libraries, and those absolutely play a critical role, primarily for performance support, especially those micro learning libraries, the the bite-sized chunks of learning, the 10 minutes here, the 15 minutes there. But I think if you're looking for the depth of learning for skills, like that's where we started to kind of think about it. Does that where executive education fit in, and the boot camps as well, in terms of developing real in-depth technical skills from that perspective. And then if we think, I think we talked about this earlier as well, but how are you aligning the requirements of the business with the executive education programs? And on the left-hand side there, the company goals, we had a great example last year where we had 600 VPs of a global organization go through one of our D&I programs. And so you had VPs from the US, the EU, UK, and India, all in part of the same cohort, and really provided this rich learning experience, but at the same time also delivered the scalable and inclusive learning experience for a subject matter critical, as mentioned, to leadership today. And lastly, in terms of impact, and as I said, there was always a tricky conversation in terms of measuring learning. But one of the things we wanted to add to the conversation, especially in light of today around issues of retention and the war for talent, is that impact could also be measured on the alignment between individual career and organizational goals. And so we've done some research as well in terms of outcomes and how does going through the executive education programs contribute to someone's career progression. And so you've kind of got some stats there, but in terms of from an upskilling perspective, so we know a good percentage of our students are able to switch to a new role after kind of finishing their program. But I think the last one is quite interesting from a retention perspective. So 66% of our alumni actually changed their role entirely. And so I think Josh Person recently wrote an article around internal talent mobility being absolutely critical in the war for talent today. And so I think executive education is also be able to use as a tool in terms of retention. And so for us, I think there's an element of the more you can tie to individual career goals as a tool to actually drive engagement and further retention. Kind of hopefully that's been helpful, kind of 4 lessons. I think that element of the human connection is absolutely critical. Thinking about the role in the L&D strategy, thinking about the subject matter. So leadership is increasingly complex, being a manager is increasingly complex, making sure that we're providing our leaders and managers with the most cutting edge thinking or the most cutting edge topics and capabilities that they need to be equipped with. And then finally measuring that impact, really taking into account someone's individual career. I think that's it from me, Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. We did have, I think, 2 questions come in, and we're flexible on time, so I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this. But we just had a question that came in that said, curious to hear what gaps do you think there are not solved by existing solutions? I founded a startup to help managers and teams improve effectiveness by mastering soft skills. So what do you think those gaps are that are not solved by existing solutions?
So I think soft skills is probably a good example, actually. So a couple of years ago, we stepped into that space very deliberately, but almost cautiously, knowing that there's a narrative in terms of can you teach soft skills online? And so that was a challenge we took head on in building a negotiation program. And so we built specifically into the actual course the requirement for students to actually do a negotiation with another person on the course with them, and to then be observed by a third kind of member of the group. And so you had this kind of real-time role play, not even a simulation, like a real world kind of aspect of how do you look at negotiation, how do you practice it. So I think that's one example. However, I think there's more that can be done in the soft skills space. Soft skills will only become more important. And I think the more the technology brings us along, like VR and AR, all those kind of cool, trendy things, I think that's probably the biggest opportunity, is to continue to develop those soft skills.
Thanks, Steve. We had actually one just come in that I wanted to throw over to you. Where do you think business skills come in, like business and financial acumen, understanding value creation?
Yeah. So I think it depends where you sit in the business. I think obviously if you're sitting in finance yourself, I would call it as one of those necessary skills. But if you're thinking, if you're outside of finance, I would put it almost in those critical thinking skills, and I would actually add curiosity in there and commercial acumen. I think there's that long narrative of the more commercially minded HR and L&D teams are, the more value they would add to the business. And so I think it depends on where you sit in the business, the need for you to be more deliberate and conscious to develop that specific kind of capability.
I think we might have had one more come in through the chat. Let's see here. We've had a chatty group today, which is always great to see. Someone said, what about gaps in leadership skill development? Let's see here. Actually, we did have one question come in that I wanted to pitch over to you. And this actually came in earlier, but I was curious to hear your insights on it. But someone asked, what are your thoughts on the importance of executive education for smaller organizations? Let's say less than 100 people, for industry, for all industries, but particularly for philanthropy, when you think about the charge they have for systems change. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think two elements. One, I think online executive education allows you to provide a relatively affordable and scalable solution to your senior executive. So you're obviously not going to have the budget of a multinational, but I do think an online cohort-based opportunity experience at least gives them that kind of experience that is somewhat comparable. I think also primarily in the executive education market, you're going to be working with some of the top universities in the world. And so I think there's that element where the executives themselves kind of feel even more valued because they're working with these incredible thought leaders in the space. That would be the one thing. On the actual element of skills development in the philanthropy sector, so again, I would argue that element around communication and soft skills is critical, right? And so just because you're in that sector doesn't mean that that pyramid and skill set doesn't apply to you as well, right? So one, your ability to lead your organization is just like any for-profit organization, but then two, that ability to communicate not only internally to your team, but then externally, which is even more critical, right? What are the different types of communication styles and how do you land your message to such diverse audiences? I think also becomes key.
Thanks so much, Steve. I feel like our questions could go on for forever. Like I said, we have so many great insights coming in from the audience, but I know we have to move into our closing session. But just thanks again, Steve, for being here today. We appreciate this discussion, and we just thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
At this time, I'm actually excited to hop back on with Steve, and I believe Lee will be coming back as well. And we're going to just sort of facilitate our closing session. We like to use this final 20 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, to get a chance to hear from you about, from all of you about the things going on in your roles, your organizations, and just to give an opportunity for more dialogue and sort of sharing of ideas among our audience today. We're going to share some polling questions just to strike up some conversation, but if you do have something to contribute, or I'm sorry, to comment on or contribute, and you want to do it vocally, you can click the little raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and the event host will turn on your audio so you can comment live. It won't turn your video on, it will just enable your audio so you can talk rather than type if you're so inclined, but you can also share your thoughts in the chat as well. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with our polls. I think we have 5 questions today, and the first one is open-ended. Welcome back, Lee. The first question that we had was, has your definition of executive education and the way you think about it changed after our conversation today? And I would actually add to that, how has it changed in the past 3 years? And Cheryl says yes.
A closed-ended question.
Yeah, it could go so many different ways. Let's see. Actually, this is another question that came in for you, Steve, while we're giving people a chance to respond. Someone wrote, what would be better, IT to expedite HR training or IT to wait until HR will be upskilled or reskilled? So if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I don't know if I have a good answer to that. Any thoughts, Lee?
Sorry, I'm on mute. In terms of how it's changed with IT,
I think so. Let's see here.
I'll go back to the question. I remember the question. So
Yeah.
IT to expedite HR training or IT to wait until HR will be upskilled and
so yeah, when I read that earlier, I was thinking of, the trend back in the 90s and early 2000s of performance consulting, and where the locus of training comes from. And if locus of training comes from HR, there's a lot of compliance focus. It's not as line of business oriented. And then IT, the joke was in the 90s, IT would never help you do anything. They could only say yes or no. I think that's changing. Well, it obviously has significantly changed because technology, I don't even like the term, IT, just it means so many different things to people, but technology is such a business enabler and a business process enabler, and it can be and should be, I think, very strategic. So I almost look at it as a line of business, even though it is in the enabling category. And so, yes, I think a lot of, I'll call it competencies around using technology are not given enough priority. We do a lot of work with Salesforce, for instance. I know that the people that we work with at the schools we serve, they are not proficient in how they use that technology, and some basic level of understanding about how to do IT competency training. I look at it as a line of business, like sales and marketing, almost in terms of how it drives an organization's value chain. So.
Yeah, people had some great comments too. IT and HR must work together, can't do it alone. They need each other's perspectives. And actually, Emma, I think you said that we had someone who raised their hand in the audience.
Yeah, it's me, Norbert.
Oh, hi, Norbert.
Yeah.
Can you share what organization you're with and your title?
I'm with the NEA Member Benefits Organization in Gatesburg, Maryland.
Welcome.
Yeah, okay. Well, I work in HR now, and HR has to really get involved with AI because there's so many things that are changing in the labor force, in work environments. Everything is changing. So HR, if it still wants to be important in directing, labor and workforce, they have to embrace AI in its entirety, because right now we have hybrid and remote work. There's liability that goes with it. HR has to play a role. There's the metaverse that is coming up. HR has to be involved in virtual reality. So they have to definitely play a role with AI. I mean, they have to really embrace each other so that HR will still stay effective and important. If not, they will be cast on the side, and somebody else or another form of, human resource or whatever the title will be will take over, because AI is really the trend of the future, and HR has to embrace it. If not, it will be rendered irrelevant. So that's my take on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hopping on. We don't get a lot of people who raise their hands, so it's great to hear your voice. Well, let's see here. Maybe we can move on to the next question. And thanks again for that comment. I think we have a poll that's a multiple choice poll coming up. And I believe this question is, which executive education subjects do you consider most important? And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe people can select as many as they'd like.
I think it's up to three.
Three.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got leadership, DEI, sustainability, well-being and resilience, digital transformation, change management, innovation, digital skills, strategy, and analytics and data science. What would be your thoughts, Lee? Uh-oh, I think you're mute.
Yep. If it depends on who you're, when you say leadership, I think everybody in the organization has some level of leadership responsibility.
Mhm.
However, a more senior leadership, as the other Steve was talking about earlier, that he called it middle talent or mid talent. I think the answers would be different for that population. So we used to use a spider diagram of looking at what are the core activities and responsibilities you have, and then really mapping that. And you have a different view depending on where you're on the organization. So at a more senior level, I'd say things around strategy and so forth. I actually already clicked on my poll, so I can't see all the things anymore. But so there was things around strategy, diversity, equity, inclusion, I think is absolutely key for everybody. And I think exec ed can provide a role with that. And then when you go into the mid-tier leadership, then I think it depends on your function, and then use of data and understanding how to use analytics, and like I mentioned earlier, providing insights from those analytics, not just vomiting out data. Application, understanding how to manage and develop a team. So I like to use the term essential skills instead of soft skills, because these are essential skills that people need to work with each other. Almost no one operates in a solitary role, like without a need for interacting with others. And so figuring out how to get the most out of a team. I think coaching skills is something that could be and need to be developed in a leader, along the lines of that, understanding how to ask good questions to help someone get to a place that they have the potential to go. So sorry, I don't have the list in front of me, but
No. Carol Curry in the chat mentioned, love the redefining of soft skills to essential skills. I think I've heard people refer to them as power skills as well. Emma, I think you said that we might have had another raised hand. Hi there. Is this Anna?
Yes, this is Anna. Yes.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, everybody. This is such a great panel and the conversation. And I really loved seeing on that list the well-being and resilience. When it's done really right from the inside out, it becomes the foundation of everything. When we are connected with who we are, the soft skills become like a natural development. Leadership skills become natural development. So it's kind of, for me, that was the very top area. And then the second one was change management. And in regard to leadership, I think leadership, there's so much about the leadership skills development. It's almost like there's so much already exists. What I would like to see more of is the distinction between leadership skills for women and men. The tendency has been that women have to lead as men. And that's where the disconnect between our biological things, some stresses occur when women tend to lead as men, and women can lead as women authentically and as effectively. And this is where I would like to see the leadership skills to be more distinct, so women connect with who they are. If they lead like with the masculine energy, over time they get disconnected with who they are, and that creates a lot of stress. And that's why we're seeing many women living in workforce during COVID and after COVID. So that's my that few points here to add to the discussion.
It's a great insight. I love that, Anna. Thank you so much. And I definitely.
Could I add to that for a second?
Yes,
and love the question, Anna. Thank you. I think maybe sharing it. So we've got a great women in leadership program with Oxford University and one with Yale University. And what I would tell you is that there's some of our highest enrollments is for those programs. And it's been incredible to watch those enrollments just continue. And what we love about the kind of student experience and the richness, and when we dive into, I think it was Lee who mentioned kind of access to the behavioral data we have through the course, the element of camaraderie and community that we see in those cohorts is unlike anything else in almost any of the other programs. And so I think there's a real richness in that particular space, and a real opportunity as well that there hasn't really been before on the scale we have today.
And I used to do change management and taking organizations to self-directed work teams back in the early 90s following the quality movement. And one of the principles was how to create heterogeneous teams succeeded better than homogeneous teams. However, one of the things I want to add to your question is men, women, people. People have a lot more differences than just being male or female, and understanding how to, for myself, at least be an ally for people who might not be able to have the same path I would to leading. And I think that's in the topic area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But understanding how to, as I said at the last panel, not knowing, and to be able to say, I don't know how to do this. Can you give me some information how I could better support you in what you're trying to do? And learning so that as a leadership population, the leaders can actually create space. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, Anna, in terms of people lead differently. And I say this to our team all the time. The way I sell or the way I lead is going to be different than the way someone else does. You have to leverage who you are and the specialness of who you are and start from that place and leverage that in a positive way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. I think we had another hand raised actually, and forgive my pronunciation, but is it Pian Pian?
Yeah, Pian Pian. Yeah, thank you, Ashley.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you to the panel. So I have a startup that focuses on helping people learn like soft skills and leadership skills through like interactive practices and recommended content from experts, some from Yale or Stanford, and executive coaches as well. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, is there, so what we are trying to do is like get people to learn every day and by reflection and throughout the courses, instead of like only go to a certain program for a few months. I'm curious your thoughts on how do we enable people to learn these like critical skills in their day and their life, like continuously. And then I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on like what are the challenges that would be different faced by real executive like C-level VP kind versus like, are you what do you think of the possibility of extending these to first-time managers, mid-level managers? And then lastly, slightly different questions, like in this economy, I heard a lot of companies are cutting budget for L&D. Like what kind of companies do you see still are investing in this kind of efforts? Thank you so much.
So 3-part questions. Lee, Steve, either or anyone want to jump in and sort of share any thoughts?
Go ahead, Steve. I'll go after you. You're muted.
Steve, I think you might be on mute.
You're muted, Steve.
After 3 years,
There we go.
I think we'd all been used to that. Yeah. So I think I'll give the first one a go. In terms of the taking time to learn the soft skills, power skills, essential skills, which I do think that's a great one. I think there's many answers to this. I don't think there's one answer. I think the one that comes to mind for me is having some level of accountability. And I think it might have been Nancy talking earlier around the element of coaching. And so for me, I think if you're tying that where someone also has a coach and they're accountable to reflect on what they've learned each week or in some kind of regular rhythm, and then meeting with their coach, whether it's every 6 weeks or every 2 months, and actually talking through those reflections. So there is some level of accountability. I think that's probably one of the ways to think about deliberately making space in someone's kind of busy schedule to do that.
Yeah, I'll build on that. In a therapeutic concept of prerequisite variety, the idea that someone's ability to respond to and successfully handle trauma or traumatic experience, the broader someone's prerequisite variety of experiences are, the more likely they're going to be able to endure let's say maybe a worldwide pandemic, as an example, that we've all just experienced. And that prerequisite variety, it's really about reflection, as Steve just said. It's not necessarily like I've traveled the world and I've seen all these things and I've had a huge variety of experiences. It's what kind of processing have I done with that? And this is one of the things that I do think will be an outgrowth of post-pandemic. We've been on this, rocket ship of blending of personal life and work life. And it's been extremely confusing for the last 25, 30 years as basically, in my opinion, when email sort of really started to become so prevalent in our world. And now, with Zoom, I mean, it's just the blending is and with COVID, with people working remote and so on. So I think there's an opportunity there instead of it being a problem around that whole work. Like, I can learn from parenting and I can learn from my personal relationships outside of work and apply that. And so those developmental opportunities that the other Steve was talking about in the earlier panel, like, we need to be careful because of that work employer-employee contract of like, I'm going to leave, like there's legal things we can't impose and so forth, but giving people personal things to practice. As a soccer coach, I would tell kids, brush your teeth balancing on your left foot, like, and then, do for the next week, brush your teeth balancing it to work on balance. So it wasn't something that we did in a practice session on the soccer field. It was something that they did at home because it built their ability to balance on their non-kicking leg. I think the same kind of things can be done without it being invasive into people's personal lives. But it's not about like, I can put on a suit and go to work and then behave a certain way, and then I behave a completely different, like, we're people. And so, and these, essential skills need to be lived rather than something I put on a show when I go to work, and then I'm different when I'm at home. Sure, there are some differences, but I think some of the skills we're talking about, or the behaviors we're talking about, they need to be, really embraced internally, and that only comes from practice. So I didn't answer the other parts of your question, but I got lost on some of the other parts of the question.
No, that was all great. Thank you both. We actually did have one more hand raised, and then I think we could take one more question and then move on to the other polls. But Emma, if there was another person whose hand was raised, I think we could see if we can answer their question real fast.
Just a point, I just wanted to bring up that no matter how many development opportunities we offer mid-level to executive level management, we still have to deal with the culture of the organization, where we see in these enterprises that we find what we're finding is that after they come back from executive development, they go back into the culture of the enterprise, where we see they're climbing the ladder. The most Machiavellian, psychotic, narcissistic leaders are making it to the top. They're rising to the top. And what we have is young managers modeling those leaders, those people who are making it to the top. Everything they've learned is gone. So yeah, in their negotiation, I always say, the KPI should be not that the individual is able to, our management used to say, so why is that toxic leader still in position? I would ask them, why, you see the toxic director, why are they still, well, they deliver for me. So until you reach that executive management at the top to change that culture, you'll still get this movement of the most toxic individuals moving up to that top of that ladder of the organization. And so you don't see the transformation that could occur from effective learning, right? We can give them all the soft skills they need, but a Machiavellian would say, oh, no, I have other negotiation skills to add to that characteristic, right? I'll take that soft skills that I learned and I'll give it that dark side. And so, you know, I don't know how to, you know, when I was asked in an interview once, what is your most challenging, what would be one of your most challenging things that you find most challenging? And I say, you know, it's that ego. It's the ego at the top of that top. You know, you want somebody who is going to take an organization to the top. That may require those characteristics that we don't admire in these leaders. It may take the Napoleon. It may take the, you know, the dark leaders to take an organization to where we want it to go today, especially when we have shareholders on our, you know, on our every quarter. And I just wanted to bring up the point that, you know, that's when we talk about measuring the effectiveness of leadership development, you know, the models that we see are certainly pushing back, whether it's a man or a woman, or any other gender.
I think we've got thousands of years of art and literature addressing the dark and light success rates. I was thinking Star Wars as well. I had I had the exact same thought as he was talking. but in all seriousness, the old adage of, you know, culture eats training for lunch. It's been an adage for a long time, and as someone who's, as I mentioned, you know, done 360s, and 360s are an absolutely black and white way of looking at how someone experiences, if they're able to be done in a way with anonymity, and that's really something that could, like you were implying, that can be done for bad as well, which is to root out who's really a problem. So culture is a big part of that, and I did a transformative training for cashiers for a grocery store chain. And I knew that if these cashiers were going to change the way they behaved and acted, and this was a very innovative, it's Wegmans, which is a very innovative grocery store, brilliant company, that we also did a series of trainings for all the coordinators and the front end managers and the store managers and the assistant store managers. This is in the early 90s. And then we did coaching in all 50 of the stores. Back then there were only 50 stores, because what you're talking about is very true. And we know this, the main reason that training doesn't stick or change in behavior doesn't stick is who is their supervisor and what kinds of behaviors are valued by a supervisor, because people, for self-preservation, are going to be pulled to try and do things that get them connected to what their supervisor is looking for. And so you're bringing up an important point, which is, what is the culture of the organization? How does that value? How are things valued? And what I would encourage people is to vote with their feet, quite frankly. Back to your using things for evil. You know, I got trained to be a neurolinguistic programming practitioner. And I decided after completing the program, which was very long, that I was not going to use that, because even though I do have generally pretty good motives, I think, it can be used for manipulation, i.e. Anthony Robbins. And so, you know, the idea of you know, what are people's motives, and are they doing it in a way that is kind and you know, thoughtful? It really comes back to what's valued in the culture of the organization, and that's a very hard thing to change or address.
Thanks so much, Lee, and thank you for all of your questions from our attendees. It's been just so great to have so much interaction coming in. I wish we could spend, goodness, all day talking about what everyone has to say. I will. I think we can go ahead and share the results of that poll 2 question as we get toward the end of the hour here. But it looks like, by and large, and I don't think I can see the bottom one here, but it looks like leadership is the subject voted most important at 73%. And then, you know, change management, DEI also high up there well-being, resilience, and strategy. So there's that one. I think we can go ahead and throw up poll question 3. Where, who do you feel is best placed to deliver exec ed? And, Lee, Steve, you may have some ideas around this as well, while people share their responses. But we have universities, other corporates, Google, Tableau, individual SMEs. It's dependent on subject, doesn't matter, no preference. And some interesting comments in the chat, I think, that tie back to the last question. Someone said, I just left my company of 17 years because of leaders looking for bad things instead of coaching for improvement, accountability. So on the most recent one, who do you feel is best placed to deliver executive education? Do either of you have any thoughts in that area?
edX and 2U.
Yes.
Shucks, thank you.
100%.
I think from my perspective, it depends on the subject matter and the context. I think in terms of very functional technical skills, that definitely feels like a place, like where employers kind of really have an upper hand. So the Googles, the tech organizations, the certifications they're building, that definitely feels like a strong point for them. Otherwise, I think the universities are well placed, but I think the challenge has always been, how do you build that bridge between research and practice, right? Like, you've got to make sure that you maintain that balance. And I think that's been the challenge on both sides for an eternity. And so I think that's one of the things that we try and do really well. And I think Steve spoke about it, and that we come really alongside the faculty member and the expert in the subject and really trying to bring that to life. But ensuring that we bring a real focus on application and industry expertise within that. So again, my answer is it depends.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add to that. I've been on a soapbox with the higher ed community, encouraging them to stay in their lane, because schools have really tried, especially with exec ed, to grow their business, if you pardon the term. And one of the things that's happened is, they aren't necessarily always the right provider. I look at R1 institutions, R2 institutions as basically being research, new knowledge generators, and they definitely should be sharing that new knowledge with as many people as possible. But in terms of the ability, so there's the knowledge, and then there's the ability to deliver it and the ability to facilitate learning happening. And they're not always good at that for businesses. For instance, did you know we're no longer on an agrarian cycle, and yet most universities still have a fall start and a spring start? And that's not how corporations run. And so that agility and that ability to provide, as someone talked about, micro podcasts or things like that drip kind of small touch, that's not necessarily their strength. And so to go on what Steve said in terms of it depends on what part of the exec ed that you're talking about. The other thing I want to say is we use terms like universities. It's not one thing. So there's some schools that are very, very focused on workforce development, and there's others that are a liberal arts institution, and they're really focusing on philosophy and making sure that you get exposure to a broad range of different things. And the same thing is true when we say an executive. I actually had trouble with the last poll question, which is leadership. Like, I would bet if there's 100 people here, there's probably 100 different views of what leadership means to each of those people. And so I don't even know what that was, when we say leadership. So the idea that, there are different universities that I think do a really good job at it. There are other universities that are trying to, I'll call it, make a buck out of not taking advantage in a mean way, but taking advantage of an opportunity to provide exec ed. So, however, universities do potentially, there's two things that I think that universities can provide. One, and I've also challenged them to do this, especially in the United States, the last 5 or 6 years, which have been very difficult. Universities can provide a safe space for difficult conversations. And when I say space, physical and also emotional space, they are generally potentially able to do that. And we really need that right now for two people with, very differing opinions to be able to come together and have a meaningful discussion. I think universities need to step up and actively provide that space. And that would be like, if you pardon the term, Switzerland for executives to be able to come in. That's probably not relevant anymore, but so that is one thing. And the second is new knowledge. They have labs, they have an ability to do research, they have an ability to go and generate new knowledge that everyone can benefit from. So those are the two things that I think universities are really, really good at. Everything else, it depends on the university.
Absolutely. And someone said amen, Lee. We had some good feedback in the chat. So thank you for that. I think we can go ahead and share the actual results to poll 3. Who do you feel is best placed to deliver executive education? And 10% said universities, 10% said other corporates, 21% said individual SMEs, 56% said, dependent on subject, to your point, and 2% said, it doesn't matter, no preference. And we have flown through this hour. I'll go through these last 2 questions quickly, but our next poll question was, what do you think are the challenges of sending teams on exec education courses? Time, cost, delivery format, don't know where to find a good provider, lack of integration with your LMS or LXP. And Lee, I was thinking to your point earlier about that leadership option with the former question. It almost seemed like that could encompass everything that came after it, like all those other choices that fall below leadership almost seem like they are a part of leadership. So I think that that's interesting. What are your thoughts, Lee, on the challenges of sending teams on exec ed courses?
So I talk about there are 4 barriers or 4 obstacles to adult learners taking programs from universities. 1 is, do they have the prerequisites? 2, do they have the motivation? How strong is their motivation to do it? 3 is cost, in terms of a lot of times it's a B2C, so it's an individual student cost. But the most important barrier to deal with is time. It's chronological time. Do I have the 9 months or the 2 years? And then it's the amplitude. Do I have 10 hours a week? Do I have 15 hours a week? So it's the length and amplitude in terms of time for an adult learner. It is by far, in my opinion, the most important, I'll call it, barrier. And then that brings up, how creative can schools or exec ed programs be in terms of their delivery modalities, in terms of the delivery flexibility, high flex or asynchronous versus synchronous. And really, it is all about time. The cost is completely related to value. And if you're providing enough value, cost is, as Nancy mentioned, who can afford not to do it if it truly does, help you in that path. So cost is a relational thing with value. And I don't think that's the barrier as much as it is time.
Yep. Someone commented, do I want to spend the time? Yep. And it looks like in the poll results, 76% of people said time. 71% said cost, and then delivery format, and then the provider and lack of integration were on the lower end with 12%. Let's roll into our final question. What are your most important success criteria for executive education investment? So we have completion, good grades, on-the-job application, MPS or learning experience, networking opportunities, or none of the above. And while we leave that open, I actually had noted here to myself, I'd also be curious. So I know Steve Moston made an earlier point, I believe during our panel discussion, where we were talking about measuring executive education and the impact it's having and what has changed in terms of how you measure, what you measure. I'd also be curious whether people in attendance are considering talent retention to be an impact measure or a success criteria.
We actually see that as some of the key drivers for our enterprise students, or should I say enterprise customers, is that being able to identify a group of high potential employees and then to invest in this program within Oxford University, for example, that's a clear signal to that employee that they are valued, right?
Mhm.
Like not everyone gets to go to an Oxford University program for a good couple of $1,000. So I think from a retention perspective, absolutely, there's definitely a clear value there. And then what I would also say is that, you know, there's just enough depth in terms of developing a new skill in executive education that it also allows someone to pivot into a new role within the same business or in the same organization. So from a retention perspective, you can still keep them in the organization. You just might lose them to your particular team.
Mhm.
And I'd say it depends on who you're asking the question from. So from the employer standpoint, on the job application, in my mind, would be the highest. And to Steve's point, retention. And then for an individual who's taking a program, I think the networking is, a huge benefit to them, and something that they would measure. Am I in a session with people who I can teach, people who are like me, and people who I aspire to be more like? And I would love to be in a room where I can say there's people I'm looking to, that I'm aspiring to. There's people I can help and feel good that I added value, and there's peers that I can feel really a lot alike them. And I think that's from the individual standpoint, an ideal situation.
Thank you both Lee and Steve. And to what you mentioned, Lee, I think the results of the poll, 87% did say on the job application. And then we had completion at 15, good grades at 9, NPS or learning experience at 39, networking opportunities at 52, and none of the above at 2%. So
I really wish we could get rid of the damn good grades thing, because I mean, really, like, come on, we're all worthy.
Yeah.
It's how do I measure Steve's worth in a way that values him? How do I measure my worth in a way that values me or yours? I mean, we're like, we got to get rid of this. And I love data and I love measurement. At the same time, what we talked about earlier, it's around, self, and someone actually mentioned it. One of their questions, which we didn't answer, is around mental health. Mental health is a serious issue. It was a serious issue before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. The entire world is experiencing a tremendous amount of stress and experienced trauma from this pandemic. To not focus on that as like a main thing to focus on, I think we're sweeping something under the carpet that's going to come out and bite all of us later. So
I 100% agree. So I'd love to continue this conversation on, but we're at the top of the hour. We even moved past a little bit, which is, just a testament to how great the conversation was. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for today's event. A big thank you to Steve, Lee, for joining us for this final portion as well. And a big thank you to Nancy, Jason, and Steve for being here with us today for our panel discussion. And of course, a huge thank you again to edX for Business for its partnership in the development of this event. Thank you. As I did mention,
thanks to CLO for putting this together. So great job.
Really well thank you, Lee. It was our pleasure. As I mentioned earlier, you'll receive an email in the next couple of days, all attendees, where we will share a recording of today's event, a transcript of the chat, a post-event survey, and certification codes as well. I do have a few housekeeping notes before we conclude. We have a few remaining Breakfast Club events coming up through the end of 2022. Our next Breakfast Club will take place November 2nd, and that one is titled Onward and Upward, The Great Skills Revolution. You can also learn more about each of these events by visiting 2022breakfastclub.com, and you can access on-demand recordings of each event upon its completion as well. We will also be bringing back this online Breakfast Club series in 2023, so stay tuned for more information about featured topics and speakers. We're really excited for that. Very exciting. I'd also like to encourage you to register for our 2022 virtual symposium next week. It's being held October 18th through 20th. We're anticipating a fantastic event, and you can get more information about the symposium if you haven't already registered, our scheduled sessions and speakers, and more at closymposium.com. Also next week on Monday, October 17th, we will be hosting our Learning and Practice Awards ceremony for 2022 online, including the announcement of our prestigious CLO of the Year. To help us recognize individual and organizational excellence in employee development, you can register to attend for free by visiting the awards section of chieflearningofficer.com. In closing, just thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you all again very soon. And in the meantime, please take care of yourselves, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks.